Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading to wrap up September 2023. I'll be talking in this video about some of the books that I've finished this month that I haven't talked about in my previous videos, and also a couple that I started but will definitely be finishing in October. I am looking at the reality that I have less free time than I actually anticipated because I am a federal contractor in the US, and you might be aware that we were looking at the likely possibility of a government shutdown as Congress couldn't come to an agreement about the budget. And it was one of those things that it wasn't a definite, but it was pretty well anticipated, and we were all kind of prepping for it for a while for the likely possibility. But in the end of the final day, with a couple of hours to spare, they actually did pull something together. So my life is going back to normal, which is really a good thing. And it's not that big of a deal. I make plenty of time to read while having a full-time job, as you have to do. So all will work out, and this certainly is a better alternative anyway. Just hope it'll be the same the next time this comes up. But anyway, let's get on to talking about books. You might have noticed that my camera angle shifted a little bit because my battery actually started buffering in the middle of my rambles, so I guess it was annoyed with my political foray, and let's just hope it's, behaves as I actually get to the point of this video. And the first thing I'm going to do is highlight an accomplishment. This is the last time I will be holding up this collection of short stories, or CARAMBA, an anthology of Jewish stories from Latin America, edited by Ilan Stavins, because as of today I have read the final short story in this collection. If you've been watching my AM reading videos, you might know I've been starting for the last couple of years, actually, by this point, by reading a short story in a collection, and I took a couple weeks off of Oi Caramba to start the Iowa Review Literary Journal, but I wanted to finish this up before the end of the month. And the story I read this week is The Secret Miracle by Jorge Luis Borges. This is a surreal sort of story that I think it's one of those based on, but it actually has a lot of Kabbalistic influence in it. It follows this Kabbalistic translator who in the 1940s is being tracked down by German authorities as, a Jew and a purveyor of Jewish culture, to be killed. And he, in desperation, strikes up a deal with God. He's in the middle of a translation, and he's like, I still need a year to complete my translation, so don't let them actually execute me in the morning. And so we get to the morning when the Germans are about to execute him, and there's a buildup of tension, and then time slows down, and you find out that, he's stuck in a place. Like, there's a water that's like stuck on his cheek and isn't moving, and there's like the fiery embers of a cigarette, and they're not going out. And he realizes that God has granted his wish, and that at the end of the year he will be killed by the bullet that is coming for him, but he has this year to finish up the manuscript. So that is what he does. And there's other, references to stories and instances of, like, falling out of time. And on an emotional level, this is about just, I suppose, confronting the harrowing reality of being persecuted and killed like this. So it's academically interesting and emotional on that sort of political angle, but I wouldn't necessarily say, like, on a character level it's incredibly compelling. I don't know. I think I'm just being a little touchy with this sort of stuff, where my emotions are more dictated by external stuff, and maybe some of the stuff that he is talking about in the story, although it certainly isn't deep enough to get into real understanding of Kabbalah or any sort of mysticism. But I would suppose if you have some, inkling or understanding of that world, that might be how you view these harrowing events. So yeah, well, it certainly was a note to end on. in terms of this collection. So many of the Jewish Latin American writers were refugees and survivors of the Holocaust, and it came out in a bunch of their stories. And this one, I suppose, brought things back to a philosophical level that, harkens onto the Kabbalah and Maimonides and Jewish ideas. So that's kind of nice and kind of unrelated, but I personally relate to these lines a little too much, I think. Hladek had rounded 40. Aside from a few friendships and many habits, the problematic exercise of literature constituted his life. So yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, about how much I organize my life around Goodreads and around BookTube, and there's just so many books I want to get through, and I have my literary journals and all of that, and my social life is, I guess, a little secondary to a lot of this stuff, and every now and then I debate about priorities. Obviously, this story is a lot bigger than that, but it's an interesting, perhaps universal theme, or at least universal to a lot of BookTube listeners. The next book I finished is We Just Want to Live Here by Amal, Rifa'i, and Odelia Ainbinder, with the help of Mideast correspondent Silke Temple. Amal and Odelia were 18-year-olds from Israel and Palestine who met in this program abroad, now 20 years ago when they were 18. This book is about 20 years old. And afterwards, Silke Temple put them in touch to write some letters to each other back and forth to try to understand their situation of growing up within the conflict. And it was a particularly fraught time when they were writing during the Intifada. The Second Intifada constituted a lot of terrorist attacks on Israeli soldiers, where buses and hotels and cafes were getting blown up. A lot of Israelis were in physical danger. There was a lot of emotional distress about this, and of course there was also a lot of response and backlash, so that Palestinian lives were also upended. And so these two girls, through these letters that are talking about various parts of reality, not really getting too deep into the weeds, a lot of times into politics, I really feel like through their experiences, and what Temple was looking for was people that were living reality without as much of an agenda, as it were, that so many adults seem to have. Yeah, it's it has a very YA feel. They're writing in English. They're pretty young, and English isn't their first language, and there's a way the letters are sort of grouped together. They also have they have various newspaper headlines from Israeli and Palestinian papers from the time to sort of give examples of how the news was being marketed to audiences. And then there were some interviews with Odelia's parents and how they came to Israel, and their family histories, and then also Amal's grandfather and his family history, and then a couple of sit down talks that were transcribed between the two girls and Silke Temple. And I think I've said pretty much everything about this before, and yeah, I think it's pretty powerful and sort of simply put out there in a way that's nice, that it can be a very fraught and sometimes complex conflict, and it's kind of nice to have it put out there in a way that's easy to read, I think, and I think it was a good book for what it was trying to do, and like I said last time, I really wish I knew what happened to these two women who would now be my age and older women, and I wonder how their lives have gone, but I'm glad they sat down for this 20 years ago. The next book I finished on audio is Translation State by Leckie. This was a space opera, was exciting to read for Space Opera September. I kind of sort of participated in that, at least unofficially. It was also a book I put on my mock reads list for science fiction. I made a couple of mock reads videos, and I'll link to my sci-fi one down below. It's basically my response to the Goodreads Choice Awards and an attempt to get myself to read more frontlist and genres that interest me, and I'm hoping later in October, I'll finish all the books on my lists and write a blog post where I rank them. So that'll be my way maybe of participating in the Goodreads Choice Awards, participating, because I'm not sure how many buzzy, popular titles I will have read. Yeah, Translation State was really interesting. And it was a weird way, I know, to get involved in Leckie's world. I guess the erotic world it is. It's weird how I listen to the audio, but I wonder if actually seeing the words would make me kind of think of how to pronounce them better. But anyway, I know that Ancillary Justice was the first thing she wrote in this universe. And I just read Translation State, which she wrote the most into recently, and then I have another one of her books, Provenance, on my shelves, which she also wrote after Ancillary Justice, so I feel like I'm going backwards here, but technically Translation State is supposed to stand alone, and I think it does stand alone, although I wonder if I would have been more immediately interested in the cultural realities if I had that background. I don't think she necessarily held our hands too much, so I was fascinated by all the work she put into the world building, but it also kind of went over my head sometimes. Like, it seems like a lot of the major things she's looking into in this book particularly is what makes a human being. And I think all of these characters are at least somewhat human, but they're... In other books, I think she looked into AI a little bit more. And then in this book, she's looking in part at a particular group of maybe former humans that no longer see themselves as human and live very separately from humans and have a very different cultural reality and biological reality for a lot of it as well. But we're following three characters. One of them is this... woman who lost her grandmother and her home, and she takes on this job that's supposed to be unsolvable, where she's trying to track down this refugee who came to another world in this universe 200 years ago, so they're thinking it's unlikely to pick up that trail, but she's able to pick it up, and she finds this person's progeny and upends his life and his understanding of who he is and his cultural background. And it also starts this big sort of intercultural upset because he is now seen to be one of these translator aliens and is being forced against his will to go back to that society. And he wants to petition that actually he sees himself as human and should be considered as human, and then he meets up with another translator who is another POV, and this person takes on the IE pronouns and also wants to be seen as human. And you know, the gendered pronouns come into this a lot, is in Leckie's way of trying to use them to bring up the point that, you know, people force genders onto other people that they don't want in a way to try to control their identities and say, I get to decide who you are, you don't get to decide who you are. And so that's maybe the part that in some ways relates the most to the modern day. You know, there's other, you know, science fiction concepts that go beyond that. Like, one of the things about these translators is that as adults they have to meld into one another or they will die. So that's, you know, something biologically that humans of today don't have to deal with, and a lot of humans of that world also don't have to deal with. And so, you know, it was all fascinating, but, you know, I don't even feel that confident to actually use any of the language that she used to describe this book. If only I'd written my review first, and then I'd maybe feel more confident. Yeah, I found it really fun. And really like deep in terms of world building and questions, but yet not as sort of pie in the sky as some of the other books I read. I still had some characters and cultural events that I could sort of be interested in beyond the philosophy of it all. Yeah, it's an interesting sci-fi year for me, I think. I got sort of deep into, like, I love the idea of probing culture, but I feel like it was a bit messy, and for me this year, just like too much information coming at me perhaps, and a lot of philosophy about what it is to be a human. It seems to be a major thing in all the science fiction I've read this year, which is only to say 3 front list titles, so we'll see how the rest of it goes. But yeah, it was a nice way to you know, pay homage to sci-fi space opera September. I'll go ahead and jump back and forth a little with these next few titles. This one I'm in the middle of is The Burning Girls and Other Stories by Veronica Schanoes, which I won't talk about too much here, in part because I haven't gotten as far into it as I would have hoped by this point, and also because I am hoping to make a video within the next week comparing this collection to another novel I read earlier in the month called Thistlefoot, because both of them are Jewish fantasy novels, or maybe more accurately, Jewish folklore novels. I know Schanoes is really looking into a lot of Jewish fantastical elements and other sort of folklore and mythological elements from other societies as well. And I have to admit, I was kind of hoping all of these stories would be more Jewish, and they're not, and I am much more interested in the Jewish content than the non-Jewish content. I guess I'm falling back on my laurels a little bit when it comes to this sort of surrealism in fiction. You know, I tend to have pretty distinct lines most of the time between realist fiction and speculative science fiction and fantasy, where I kind of prefer when things are in one camp or the other, and this sort of, you know, magical realism or fabulism or surrealism, it kind of straddles the line a little too much for me, and in that biased sort of way I feel like I mostly get it when it's about my own culture. And I guess it's kind of the similar thing with the short story I talked about earlier as well. So I guess it's nice to know when it does work for me, and I should try to make it work for me a little more often, I suppose. I don't know, but yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things to say about this book in comparison to Thistlefoot, so hopefully that'll be a really good video, and I'll just go ahead and push the ball down the lane for me a little bit, so, you know, good luck, future self. But other than that, I do intend to enjoy the rest of this collection, I hope. And I'm jumping yet again back to Space Opera September with this book on audio. This is Martians Abroad by Carrie Vaugn. And this is actually the book that I chose through one of my TBR games, my BookTube Spin TBR game that I took from Rick McDonnell. It seemed like very apropos timing to get to it. Well, you know, at least I started it in September for Space Opera September. This is YA sci-fi, and it's a lot more straightforward, I think, than I was talking earlier about, you know, getting deep into the weeds of the world building and the cultural questions and who is human and all of that. But in this one, I've only read a chapter so far, but it just seems very on the level. You know, we're following a YA character who happens to live on Mars in the future, and whose mother is happening to send her against her will to Earth. And she'll probably find out what she's supposed to there, like, you know, about the ways that her perceptions of Earth don't match with reality, and she'll find friends and actually be able to follow her dreams there. I mean, at least that's what I assume, if this is sort of a straightforward story, where technically you could say, like, well, maybe if it was a girl moving, you know, from one city to another, you know, it could be kind of the similar story, but we do have this cool sci-fi conceit and, you know, technology and space travel added on top of it, which is fun, but it is kind of nice for me, too, to be able to read something that's more fun and escapist, perhaps. So that's what I'm hoping for this story, and hopefully I will be finishing it soon. And finally, I am just at the beginning of The Shore by Sara Taylor. This is a book that is at the top of my Goodreads TBR. I have a annual goal for myself to knock off a bunch of the books that are at the top of that TBR list on Goodreads. So this one has been around for a while. I even played with it once on one of my other TBR games, the page 112 tag. And as far as I can tell, this is another sprawling family drama. In fact, it has this massive family tree. I'll see if I can get to it here. Here we go. And all of the chapters move back and forth in time, so I'm not sure how much I'm liking that so far. You know, because I feel like I kind of got invested in the first group of characters, and now I have to, you know, jump back in time and understand the next group. And you can see that list, you know, it starts in the 1800s, and then there's a lot of descendants. And there's, you know, a melodramatic pulpiness to this, so hopefully that'll make it fun to follow in that way, I hope. I also was excited because some of these chapters take place in the future, so I thought that might be fun. We'll see what she does with that. So yeah, maybe this is my, I guess you could technically say this is also speculative, probably not spacefaring science fiction, but you know, something. So, yep, This is the final book I want to finish for my September reading. And that about covers it for me now. I've certainly been rambling on enough. Thankfully, my battery hasn't buffered again. Speaking of running up against a quick deadline, on Saturday in the afternoon, I finally submitted my BookTube Prize ballot for the BookTube Prize, which is a major project I'm involved in most of the year. And our director, Robert, recently emailed to say that he's pushing up the announcement of the winners to Wednesday, so that'll be really exciting. But before I watch that and, you know, record my own reaction video, there's plenty of other videos or at least a couple others, maybe I'll try to squeeze in before then. And the next one imminently in my future should be my writing quarterly wrap-up video, because not only is it the end of September, it's kind of the end of summer, and I gotta check in with Septa and Ella and see how I did with my writing goals, so stay tuned for that. And I hope you are all doing well with your goals, reading, writing, otherwise, and have especially found some great stuff to read. And even if you have to, like me, you know, move around a full-time job to do it, you know, boo-hoo, but, you know, I'm sure we'll make it work somehow. So, yeah, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.